and hello everyone, and welcome once again to the webinar about interface disruptive IoT put by DIH². I'm Álvaro Parejo, I'm project manager at EC Accelerator. In this webinar, I'm going to introduce you to the DIH² network and our purpose. Then I'm going to take you through the resource we are offering to you as part of the DIH² services, which are free online courses about technological and digital skills. It is designed to be useful for SMEs and individuals working in manufacturing and robotics. And then I'm going to hand it over Alexandra, our guest experts and the creator of the course of Interface Disruptive and IoT. She's going to take you through key points to know about the topic, and when she's done, we have time for questions and answers. So let's get started. DIH² believes in the power of robotics to transform the agility of manufacturing in SMEs and to drive economic growth across the European Union. Our role is to facilitate the connections and enable agile production in factories where speed and versatility are essentials to satisfy customers' demand. Originally funded by Horizon 2020, the European Union Research and Innovation Programme tasked with bringing great ideas from lab to market. We aim to create innovation that maximizes productivity and optimize agility in manufacturing SMEs and meet gaps across the European Union. In addition, our goals include improving the cost effectiveness of advanced robotic solutions and driving growth of the robotics market. We already have a large and growing ecosystem of organizations that have joined our network. And if you're interested in learning more about joining, you can visit dih/square.eu. Here in the next slide, the DIH network is managed by a number of different partners from across Europe, each playing a different role. As I said before at the beginning, I'm from ISDI, which is a business school for the digital era, but based in Spain. Our role is to provide training courses that are currently open and free for everyone to access. The objectives here in this slide, as you can see, of the courses are that we aim to introduce users in the European manufacturing sector to new technologies and ways of work, to teach to implement those ways of working, and to ultimately support the update of innovation in manufacturing SMEs across Europe. Here in the next slide, as you can see, you can view our courses via our online platform, dih/square.mooc.rom.eu, and you can browse the entire catalog without registering. But if you would like to take a course, you will need to create an account in order to access all didactic materials. It's very quick and easy to create an account, and here in the next slide, you will see the large number of courses that you can that are specifically focused on technology related to manufacturing and robotics that you can access if you register through the platform. Here you can see a list and a better overview of what we have on courses on the platform. And in the next slide, in addition, we have a wide range of courses about digital skills, aimed to help you bring your knowledge into the modern world, and topics covered include agile methodology, data-driven marketing, interface design and usability, and much more. All of the courses feature video, text, slides, and graphics that are interactive and are an interactive learning experience. Many courses also allow you to test your knowledge at the end of with self-assessment, and the length of time it takes to complete a course can vary from between 1 hour or less up to 10 hours. Depending specifically on each topic. Here on the next slide, again, you have the link where you can access the platform. And then now in the last slide, in the next one, here I would like you to introduce you to our guest speaker for today. She's Alexandra Deschamps. She's a Chief Design Officer and an author, consultant, and entrepreneur with over 15 years experience across climate change, ethics, and Internet of Things. She's with us today to talk about disruptive IoT, and we are very glad to have her here. So thank you very much, Alexandra. Now you can share your screen.
Thank you, Alvaro, and I'm so excited to be here, so excited to be presenting today a bit of a short snippet of my masterclass, yeah, just a delight. Just to let everyone know, I appear to be having audio issues on my side, which means everyone can hear me, I can hear no one. So I'm really hoping that you can fill the Q&A and give me some great questions for the end, but I get to monologue to myself for the next 30 minutes. So let's get going. Hopefully you can see that straight away. I'm hoping, and if you can't, I will probably get a little wave. Just to give you a snapshot of my background and how I came to ISDI in 2018, really, to give this masterclass originally. I was the first distributor of the Arduino in the UK, and I see that Davide Quartieles is part of the roster of ISDI because the hardware and IoT family is very small. I was the founder of something called the Goodnight Lamp and the curator of the London Internet of Things meetup for almost 10 years. I also spearheaded Better IoT, which is a checklist for product managers and startups that I will talk about in a little while at the kind of tail end of this presentation. And I've written 2 books since this webinar was put together. So we've got 30 minutes together, and what I'm going to try to do is give you the highlights of the masterclass that's part of the curriculum. We'll do sort of a contracted version of what you might find in the masterclass. And so instead of 30-minute long sessions for each one of these 3 areas, we'll do 10 minutes for each. And then we'll move on to Q&A at the end. So hopefully that works for everyone. And what we're going to be covering is what's the Internet of Things, my thoughts on the ecology, and I think the masterclass kind of gives you a much more deeper view on all these topics, but at least you'll get a sort of snapshot here. How is it different from other IT projects in general, and best practices and risk management. Some of you, if you're attending this, you probably have an idea at the back of your mind, or you've been hearing about this term for a long time, or you want to know how to connect your existing business, group, team to this topic. And so hopefully the masterclass in its entirety is really useful to you, but you'll get the highlights today. So let's get started. What's the Internet of Things? It's a little bit like talking about design and what's design. So depending on who you're going to speak to in your career, you're going to get slightly different versions of this. I like to use a sort of cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary definition and just say that it's about using a range of connectivity options to build new types of product experiences. And hopefully those product experiences can become part of a wider ecosystem of experiences. And what I mean by that is really the difference between the Internet of Things and just things, or the internet, is that there's a connectivity that links these things together. When things are connected or have a piece of connectivity attached to them, what can you do? What can you build? And how do you go beyond just using screens or digital experiences only? Or how do you bolster digital experiences with the physical realm, with the built environment, with the objects that we have in our day-to-day life? So that might be because you're connecting things that might be in a home. It might be that you're connecting healthcare products or healthcare related experiences. You've got city infrastructure or city services that are connected to digital services. You can have infrastructure like bridges, for example. How you might have educational experiences, and you might teach this kind of stuff using connected devices. how you might do care work or provide social care, and how you might feed yourself or look at the food systems that we have or work experiences that we have. This is 2023. We're all talking to each other via these digital experiences, but we also have to remember that we are sitting on a chair, on a desk, in a space, in a neighborhood, in a town. The physical realm is really all around us and permeates us and is getting more and more embedded with new technologies. And I think it's important to understand where that's going, where are the pitfalls, where are the risks to getting that connectivity kind of everywhere. And so in terms of, what an Internet of Things product is likely to include, you will very well have either a physical product or a piece of physical infrastructure that you're attaching yourself to. You will have software that's embedded in that product in some way, because that product will probably have a piece of electronics, a communication layer, and so technology that you've made a choice around, whether that's GSM, whether that's Wi-Fi, whether that's, I was waxing lyrical this morning about DECT, whether there are just different ways in which you might get that piece of electronics and its software to communicate to a cloud service, and then how that cloud service communicates to other services. Open source software, open source hardware, we'll come back to that, are an important part of that ecology, and having an API for your cloud service is really important. It allows other people to build on top of what you're doing. It allows other people to understand how they can use your data and the data that you're gathering with the product that you're making. And in the masterclass, I sort of go into a little bit more depth around this, but there's a huge ecology of companies around this space that has been growing. The terminology has changed. So a good indicator of this is a book that a friend of mine wrote. Her name is Claire Rowland. She wrote a book on connected devices. And so you're likely to hear the word connected, connected health, connected cities. Smart is another word that you're likely to use. Smart cities, smart homes, etc. But they're all, at their core, if you will, they're still a physical product that has some intranet put in it that 20 years ago wouldn't have had. And so how you look at that ecology of companies is also something that you can do research around. And in the masterclass, I mentioned resources that you can look at in order to understand what is in that ecosystem. The example I give here is a map from Beecham Research, which is a research organization, and they've done a nice sort of diagram around what are some of the different verticals that you might find Internet of Things products in, and what's the, in a way, the size of those companies and the size of those opportunities. So really worth diving into that. And then we'll still, I suppose, and this is now, the Internet of Things as a term was coined in 2001. So maybe the Internet of Things is now no longer a teenager and maybe a grown-up, but there are still a lot of startups out there. And you will see a lot of startups still developing. I hear about new startups all the time that are doing a piece of physical hardware that is connected to the internet in some interesting way. And those startups, I think, have been the ones that have really given the sector a lot of its strength now. And so those will generally be, and this might be describing your own company and your own SME, but these will be companies that are quite small. They have a simple product, a clear vertical, and hopefully some very strong marketing abilities. And I'll come back to this 3 to 5 year issue, but a lot of them will tend to go towards a crowdfunder at some stage for various reasons, and I'll get into that. But I wanted to highlight the startups as part of the ecology because I think that they have really been the engine behind this sector, behind the idea that we could get to a place 20 years after the term was coined, or 20 3 years after the 22 years after the term was coined, where we have a wide variety of companies that have invested through the years through that period of time, some of whom are very established and others are still finding their feet, but you couldn't get established if you hadn't started as a startup. So I think that startup journey is still important. And as part of that ecology, there are still to this day, and I just looked at these earlier today, a lot of incubators that are servicing Internet of Things startup or ideas. These incubators are everywhere around the world. A lot of them, since the pandemic, have also started to integrate health and climate tech. Climate tech is another good sort of buzzword in the last few years, because there still will probably be an element of hardware, an element of software, and an element of connectivity, but the application is for conservation reasons, or energy management in the home, or energy management for businesses. And that climate change story has been growing, but at its core, for many of the applications, there's still a piece of hardware, a piece of connectivity. So those incubators that you see on the screen are offering forms of support for anybody doing an IoT project, and are starting to kind of also specialize in a way. So all of these incubators will have a tendency to specialize in their own ways. Disney, for example, you might imagine, is not necessarily going to support industrial applications, but consumer applications, versus someone like Techstars and Hacks, who are really interested in robotics, for example. So obviously in the webinar, I sort of, again, go into more detail, but in this second section, I'd like to spend a little bit of time to talk about how different this is to traditional, either digital work or IT projects. In the webinar, I talk a lot about methodologies and the difference between agile and waterfall, and what makes this a sort of hybrid of the two. I'll skim over that here, but I also wanted to start with the different ways in which traditionally we have dealt with hardware. So in a traditional context, and this is maybe the context of the last 100+ years since the beginning of intellectual property, we will have an idea, probably build a prototype of some kind, probably protect the IP in some way, and that's either by registering a design, patenting the idea, and sell that or license that to a manufacturer to get some kind of kickback of some kind, either through the licensing agreement, or it might be a royalty share, or, and that has largely dictated a lot of different product development through the last 150 years. And if you were sort of taking that journey on and you wanted to do the whole thing yourself, so you're not only interested in developing an idea and protecting it, but you're actually developing an idea and then going in and manufacturing it yourself, then you'll have the idea, you'll build a prototype, you might protect it in some way, and then you might start to showcase it in trade shows, get it in front of the press, etc., and start to get, in a way, feedback on what you've done. But you've sort of invested already in a form of prototyping and a form of protection that has cost you probably quite a lot of money at that stage. And based on the feedback that you might have, you might then convince a manufacturer to partner with you, pre-industrialize it, make sure that that industrialization route is leading to tooling being developed, and all of the sort of associated dynamics in manufacturing, make a batch and try to sell it. And that's been more or less traditional product development. I think one thing that came with the Internet of Things is certainly an environment that disrupted this particular landscape. where you could sort of skip over the manufacturing bit in order to go directly to a consumer or a customer or potential customer. And I think that's been a real game changer for how consumers consider the viability of a product. Organizations and startups and even design departments inside large organizations are able to test the market, because you're no longer testing with a small test group inside a traditional sort of a customer feedback environment, but you're able to go out there in a mass way on these crowdfunding platforms in order to convince yourself and raise money to get to that pre-industrialization stage much more quickly. And I think that's been a real change, and it's really allowed organizations to get to market very quickly. It's allowed hardware and connected hardware organizations to get to market extremely quickly in ways that we hadn't really experienced before. So the story of IoT is also hand in hand with the story of crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is, of course, changed, but it's still around. It's still extremely effective. And when organizations are looking for that bit more of a marketing boost, a crowdfunder always does the job. Even if it might not raise the appropriate amounts, it is in itself an advertising and marketing machine that's extremely useful. So there's an iterative project or process here that I think is really useful to think about and useful to plan for if you're trying to test the waters around something. And then, it sort of implies, I think, that we also, because of this new landscape, we also think about how we might build prototypes at all, because crowdfunding is really about showing usually a prototype of some kind. And that prototype development is something that's got multiple stages, it's got multiple levels of quality, it's got multiple levels of, you can kind of render a prototype to make it as close to the final product as possible, because you're working with the manufacturer already, even at the prototyping stage, or you're, doing all of this in computer-aided design, and you're able to sort of give someone a flavor of what they'll see, but they can't hold it, they can't experience the weight of it, and they can't imagine themselves putting it in the space. So prototyping, sort of allows you to choose where on that journey you might be. And I think that the biggest learning from myself and the people around me has been that process of prototyping can take a long time. Why does it take a long time? Well, again, depending on how far into and how close to the final product you want to get, you can really spend a lot of time figuring out what the right materials are, who your suppliers would be for all these different bits, because there's probably an enclosure of some kind for the product that you're making. You've probably got some electronics there. They will have and suffer from different sort of delays because of the pandemic, because of climate change, because of resourcing issues. A lot of the sort of disruption in electronics of the past few years has been because of disruption with water shortages in Taiwan, for example. So there'll be a lot of dynamics that slow your process down when you're developing that prototype. If you were building a website or you were building a digital product, that prototype stage is quite quick. And it gets you to a place where you've got your MVP that you can present to your customer, and it sort of looks like the MVP it might look like on most devices and most browsers. There's sort of all the tools are there to facilitate this. As soon as you have a piece of hardware, you've got other dimensions that you need to really look at. Availability of materials, availability of components, how a consumer really reacts to a product that they have to see in their hands. And again, they have to feel the weight of it. They have to look at the packaging experience. They have to figure out if they understand how to install it, how to troubleshoot it if you're troubleshooting a product. All of these things can have a real impact on how the product is adopted. and how people respond to that product, even in your testing stage, even in your marketing, when you're kind of in that early stages of your marketing on crowdfunding. So all of that will tend to drag things out. And it means that your minimum viable product also comes with a minimum viable team, potentially. So as you're prototyping, you're not prototyping usually, unless you're an incredibly talented and well-connected engineer. You're probably not prototyping on your own. You're prototyping with others. You're asking others to join you on a journey that might take you 2 to 3 years. That might mean an industrial designer somewhere in there, an electronics engineer, software developer, and back end as well as front end design, in order to make sure that every aspect of your product somehow is getting closer and closer to a prototype that makes sense for a consumer to respond to. So it's not, again, if you're doing a digital product, it's a completely different team that you might build. Whereas for hardware, you've got all these different competencies. The great thing about IoT, and because it's been 20 odd years since the sector sort of named itself, let's say, is there are a lot of different partners, and there are a lot of different organizations that will do some of that as part of an incubation process. So that's why I mention incubators, because if you're an engineer or you're someone with a great idea and you don't have an electronics engineer near you, you don't have a software person near you, chances are people who are around you in the ecosystem and who are in those incubators will have that at their fingertips, and it's sort of part of the deal of you joining that incubator or that accelerator. But thinking about yourself as not being a team of 1 or 2, but a team of 3 and 4, and potentially with a manufacturing partner, means, again, it slows things down, your relationship building, you're making sure that people are engaged with you and in your team and feel a sense of, there's a sense of momentum, so that you can get to that prototype slightly more quickly. And I mean slightly, just because, again, we're talking very probably years. I have very rarely in my career seen someone get to a final and manufacturable and well-costed MVP within a year. It's very rare. It happens, but it's really, really the edge of the bell curve. It's not the middle of the bell curve. And I think this comes down to, this is the double diamond. If you've never seen this, this is a distillation of the design process for any product, no matter whether you've got tech or not. I think it's always good to kind of come back to this as a process to say, am I working on the right thing? Because your prototype allows you to recalibrate every time you're showing it to someone. And every time you're kind of getting feedback, chances are you'll have multiple generations of prototypes that you're going to be developing for someone over the course of that 2 to 3 years. And you're going to constantly be iterating and checking and getting people to look at it and go, not quite the right material, or feels too heavy, or hard to, read the text, or hard to, pick up, or the packaging feels off, or all these things. And that always allows you to come back to, am I working on the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And that discovering and defining is, for me, where your prototyping stage sits. And then once you've sort of figured out everything, you might go to a crowdfunding campaign, or you might go to an investor and they go, yep, okay, cool, let's go. Then you're developing and delivering so that that product can get into people's hands. So I've got 8 minutes left, so I'm not doing too bad, which is good. I'm going to finish with this last bit, and in that section on methods and ways of thinking, I go into a lot more detail, of course. This last section is sort of, what are some of the watch outs? What are some of the things that you might experience once you're sort of deep into the process of prototyping? You might have an investor, you're thinking about getting a product to market. What are some of the things that are inherent problems and challenges that come with the fact that you've got connectivity and a piece of hardware? Lots of things can go wrong, just like any other product. I mean, this is why there's consumer protection laws and data protection laws, because things happen all the time. And so I think it's better to think of it as, okay, I've got to prepare myself for these things to happen, as opposed to ignore them entirely and think that you're going to get away with it without any problems. So I think it's best to mitigate risks. So problems and challenges that have occurred throughout the sector have included privacy and security breaches, bad user experiences, lots of, and I would say these are two of the things that have shaped people's experiences the most. A few years ago, I worked on something called betteriot.org, which you can look at, and in the masterclass, I go into the details, but I thought I'd give you the top line of what Better IoT suggests, which are techniques, questions you might want to ask yourself, considerations as you're going through your process of development. First one off is privacy. I think it feels a little bit easy, but it's actually extremely hard. And this might mean allowing users to access their data. This is part of, if you live in the EU, this is part of GDPR, and this sort of applies to anybody building a website these days. And so the same thing applies to IoT. Making clear how to users how their data is collected, allowing people to delete their collected data, which if you've sold them a physical product is kind of a fun and interesting challenge, because how do you give them the sense that they can come back to you and say, I would like the data around this, baby monitor to be disconnected. Allow users to migrate that collected data somewhere else. This is also a really great question and challenge. And in the webinar, in the masterclass, I also give examples from the market. The second consideration might be ownership. So allowing people to kind of gift each other things. We are living through a climate crisis where the circular economy and renting things or giving things away as opposed to throwing them away is coming really into the social fabric of everyday life. And so if it's a connected device, you're probably going to sell a person a connected device, and they're probably eventually going to put it on eBay or give it to someone or re-gift it to someone for Christmas. So how do you allow that data to sort of flow between devices no matter what? How do you protect also someone's data when they've gifted that device to someone else? Can they archive it? Can they move it away somewhere else? And how do you allow users to turn off connectivity if it feels too intrusive at some point or their use around the product changes? You have to sort of allow them to do that in order to have good governance around what you're building. Transparency is another one that I talk about in the masterclass. So making sure that people understand why it's a connected device and what are the implications if the connectivity is kind of turned off. So if they decide to turn off the connectivity, does the function of the product change? The terms of service, making sure that they're reminded of what that means when they've bought your product, it's 3 years down the line and your T&Cs change. How do you communicate back to that customer? How do you let them know through the device or through the digital service that they might be using? All these things have to be designed from the get-go and thought about from the get-go. Security, I go into a little bit more detail, but there are wonderful people who apply what in the UK is called security by design principles. So thinking about how your business as a design group, as a company, as a startup is applying these principles from the word go in your tech teams and in your physical hardware teams as well. And then an important, again, dimension because of climate change is how that product is able to, again, sort of have a second life if people want it to have a second life. That might be because you allow a factory reset on the device because you give people a physical button to do a factory reset with, which means you've got to design a physical button to do that. be clear about how long you expect to service that product over its time, and be clear about the levels of support during that expected lifetime of the product. There's more and more right to repair laws that are coming in, especially in the EU, where products will eventually, and IT products that are not white goods, but really sort of digitally led products, are going to be expected to be repairable with everyday objects and everyday screwdrivers, hammers, etc. So you might need to design your product in a way to make it repairable from the word go. And then lastly, think about interoperability, how you might allow third parties to connect to your product because it enhances the use of that product. It makes that product more powerful because it's talking to Google Calendar or it's talking to some health app somewhere. And how do you grant those third parties access to some of the functionalities in order to ensure that your customer is protected? If you go bankrupt, you want that product to still keep going and for that product to not become e-waste. In some countries, your customer might not be able to throw away your product at all, or they might be fined for throwing away your product. So you want to ensure that that product has a long life. Might not be with you, but it'll be with someone else. And my last minute on this presentation, openness. So thinking about open source. Whether that's open sourcing your software, whether that's open sourcing the hardware. These are big decisions. They are probably going to affect your IP in some way, shape, or form. But the IP protection environment for something like IoT is very complex and worth looking into. Absolutely have conversations with IP lawyers who work in technology, understand the bits you can protect, the bits you'll never be able to protect, and should just not worry about. So hopefully this is a whistle-stop tour of what is an hour-and-a-half long masterclass, but we've talked about what the Internet of Things is. We talked a little bit about the difference with an IT project and best practices and things that you might think about when trying to mitigate for the worst. I hope this has been useful, and I would love some questions in the chat because I can't hear anyone.
Thank you so much, Alex. I know you cannot hear us, but I already sent you the question from Dennis. So
I've got a couple of questions here, which I'm going to read out, and hopefully this is okay. So how to survive being a startup with a B2B product, no crowdfunding, but long release cycles for a few years. Oh, absolutely. It's a pain in the neck. I have lots of friends who have B2B offers, and the sales tactics are different. How people might invest in your product is also different because you're kind of asking them to change the way in which they do business potentially. And so I think it's really about having much like a big pipeline of potential customers, and just prepare yourself for long timelines. Prepare yourself for conversations where someone might want a free-ish pilot for, one particular kind of application in order to gauge how complicated it is for their staff to use, how complicated it turns into for them to manage long-term. And also, I would say, use it as an opportunity to do user testing. Don't think of it as a sort of sales experience, but think of it as testing out your assumptions, because your assumptions might be, for example, and I can think of a lot of industrial applications where that's the case, where you think your customer wants a ton of data every millisecond around what happens to a thing, and actually no, they just want to know if that product or that machine or that environment needs to be replaced and maintained. And so the the millisecond data that you might want to be gathering, actually they kind of don't want that because their staff don't know how to read that data. The churn of their staff doesn't allow them to train people up properly. And so all they want is a red button once in a while that just says, this machine needs to be maintained. So I would say use your sales cycle as a learning cycle more than anything else, but it is longer. It takes, I think, a lot of patience. And again, you can decide how you want to play that. And I think having multiple conversations with multiple types of clients worldwide, where their pressures and their, their economic environment and financial pressure quarter on quarter, year on year are going to be different. And you might just be able to have, 1 or 2 good sales conversation, but at least you've got 10 going. And you just, ensure that you're learning from all of those in different ways. Hopefully that's useful, Dennis. Any other questions from anyone?
If anybody has any questions, please, you can tell me and I write it down, or directly write it down. Even though we're already near the end.
Thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so if there is no more questions, I would like to thank everybody. Just as a last thing, I'd like to show you again, if you're interested in coursing this MOOC created by Alex, you just need to go into DIH².mock.ramp.eu, which I am adding to the chat, that you can access it directly from here. And it's as simple as easy as you arrive here, you can directly register, or you can look into all the different courses that we have here. You click on Disruptive IoT. We've basically got the syllabus, a little bit of information about Alex. But if you actually want to enroll, you need to first register, and then it's as simple as this: create your account, so that way you can access all the courses. As you can see, there's for different levels, for people that are way more tech savvy, have, or maybe more experience in the technology world. There are others that are maybe more, more simple, more tech related. So you just need to go through the portfolio and see what it is, what works for you. So in any case, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Alvaro, for the introduction. Thank you, Alexandra, for this webinar, and see you everybody next week. Let me also share this, because we've got our upcoming webinars coming on the 17th of May. We're having machine learning and AI getting started with Ed Fernandez. I think this is going to be a really, really interesting webinar. And I think that's the upcoming year. You can follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, which is where we're sharing all the information about these webinars, about the courses, and many other things that you might find interesting. And thank you very much, everybody.